Penn State's got a lot of strengths on this roster for the 2023 season. So on this episode today, we're going to decide which group is the best position group. And in that same breath, who's the weakest link?
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Zach Seyko. I am your host of the show. Today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. That is FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Over on the other side, that is Jason Lord, special guest joining the show, former ESPN Radio State College analyst. Also did the Penn State tailgate show for local radio stations and is going on 18 years, Jason. You will be going on 18 years for high school sports coverage of the local area high school and state college.
Yeah, you say that. 18. Oh man, it is 18 years, isn't it? Yeah, it's been a while, but yeah, it is. Looking forward to it again come fall.
Yeah, so a lot of fun you do, of course, incredible work, and we're bringing you on here because you and I both have the same type of interest when it comes to the Penn State Nittany Lions, and this is just kind of an all-encompassing conversation from this point where we are in mid-May. What's the roster look like, the strengths, the weaknesses, the way the schedule kind of lays out. I want to ask you at the end what your thoughts are on the potential whiteout game, because I've gotten some pushback about Penn State versus Iowa. I think Iowa's the whiteout opponent, but people still think it's Michigan. Some people would lean West Virginia. I'm not even going to put Indiana in the conversation. There's no way that one happens, but that's why we're going to talk about it. Save the best for last. Let's start with this. The position groups are still they're always in motion, right? Penn State's still recruiting defensive tackles. Penn State's still recruiting wide receivers. Before we get to the quote unquote weaknesses, best position group on this Penn State football team for you, Jason, is.
I'll tell you, it's strange to say this because they just had a guy go in the second round, a guy go in the third round, but I think it's the secondary. I think that secondary is still very strong. You're going to see what King can do now. You just saw it last year, but he was a little bit under the radar because of how good, Porter and Brown were. But now you have him. I think, Johnny Dixon's gotten a lot better. Keaton Ellis brings that experience too, which is going to help a lot. Wheatley being there too. I think the secondary to me is extremely strong and is going to be a very big part of this team. Once again, despite the fact they just lost a guy to the second round, should have been the first round, and lost a guy to the third round in Jair Brown.
Yeah, and if we're splitting hairs, Jason, I mean, Joey Porter Jr. was taken 32nd overall. That's typically...
Yeah, and taken in a good spot, too, obviously. Went the same place his father went, which I think is alone a great story, where going to the Steelers and playing for the Steelers. But, I think Porter was a guy that, people looked at his weaknesses a lot more than his strengths. Only gave up one pass over 15 yards last year. It just was a phenomenal player. He brings that height, too. He kind of has that Richard Sherman height, which I think a lot of guys are looking for in the NFL, a lot of scouts nowadays. So, 32nd overall, so you could say technically first-round pick because they were minus a pick in the first round, but I still think he should have gone higher. But, now he can prove that in Pittsburgh in a very good situation with a very good defense.
Yeah, secondary, of course, between Kalen King. They did lose Storm Duck, so I'm not surprised that you said that, but just you had a veteran cornerback. You had someone that was all ACC just a year ago, even though that was an abysmal secondary for the Tar Heels and Mac Brown. But Storm Duck coming in and providing that basically a co-starter with Johnny Dixon, and that tells me either Johnny Dixon is much better than advertised.
Yeah, I think he has gotten better.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a big part of my logic. I think Dixon's gotten a lot better. He's not. I don't think he's at the level where Kalen King's at, no. But I think he's a lot better. But I think Wheatley on the back end, and also having a guy like Keaton Ellis, who he's been around the program. He's been around the good and the bad. I think when you have that leadership, which I think is huge on a team, that helps you a lot too. I think that's why that position to me, that back end of that defense still looks very good in the secondary.
There's a lot of choices. Yeah, and there's a lot of choices we can go with. I hope the comment section jumps in this conversation too, because you could argue the linebackers with Abdul Carter, the return of Curtis Jacobs.
Jacobs' leadership.
the true freshman.
Yep. I think you could argue offensive line too.
Yeah.
As good as they've been now, this is as good as on paper, as experienced of an offensive line and as good of an offensive line as I've seen at Penn State. Probably, oh man, you go back to the early, you might say the late 2000s, like the 08, 09 teams, but I thought they struggled a little bit on the O-line there. So I think you might even go back to the 90s where you have, now I'm not at all saying Jeff Hardings and Marco Rivera are on this offensive line. They're going to be drafted. Olu's going to be top 10. I think that's very clear as day, unless something really goes wrong. But I think to me, this line experience-wise is and getting that starting last year, especially with the injuries at the end of last year, where you saw other guys step in and play incredibly well too, and get the opportunity. I think this line, this O-line, on paper looks real good going into summer camp.
Yeah, they do. And they have a kind of the same thing that I was making the point about the linebackers with a Tony Rojas, a Tamir Robinson, the freshmen that come in for that group, Javen Williams, Alex Birchmeyer, Anthony Donko. Those guys aren't going to play, but they're definitely quality backups that if somebody isn't available to go, and I'm not going to say, oh, we're going to miss somebody for the season, but I'm talking, late in the game, somebody needs a breather. I trust an Alex Birchmeyer to go in at guard or tackle. I trust a Javen Williams to protect the blind side of Drew Aller or Bo Prabula when he comes in some Wildcat packages. I think this is that's a solid group. For me personally, linebacker, defensive end, secondary, as you mentioned, O-line's in the conversation. I'm going to go with the running backs because there's something different about this group that not everybody else has. Nicholas Singleton is a Heisman contender. And honestly, Katron Allen, if he wasn't the quote-unquote number 2 back, if he was the lead back, he'd be in that same conversation as well. So you have 2 legitimate Heisman contenders at one position. They bring in Trey Potts to be the third back. And then you have Tank Smith. Emil Davis is really good. Tyler Holtzworth is really good.
Great.
I know that they're not starters and that they're not second or third string, but these are guys that they could go to any – I don't want to say mid-major, right? If they go to a smaller FBS school, they go to FCS, and they're racking up yards if they go anywhere else. So this group, because of the superstar power that you have with Singleton and Allen, and then you have Trey Potts who could go and start at other Power 5 schools, along with all the veteran experience that you have in the 4th and the 5th spot.
Running back is strong, but here's the problem. You have depth. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like where we were last year with the linebackers. You had depth, but you didn't really – there's still a great unknown a little bit behind Singleton and Allen. I think Tank Smith will be good. I really do. I think Potts as a pickup was huge. You're going to have guys that are going to be redshirted that are going to be real good down in the future, a guy like Montgomery. But, I think the concern for me at running back would be the proven commodity. And then you have it clearly, Singleton and Allen. If I'm putting the top 5 in college football in terms of dual running backs, they're in the conversation. So it's a strength. But the concern for me is if they go down, the unfortunate part of injuries. You have the depth. Can that depth step up? I think getting Potts in the portal was huge. I did a Williamsport guy, a local guy, knows the program that way. So I think that helped a lot. And as you said, I think the other guys are going to play well, but just the unproven part of it makes me move them down to probably 3rd or so in terms of strength.
Unproven. That's a strong word because I think Singleton and Allen have proved plenty in just.
Oh,
one
no,
season.
they've proven. No, they've proven. I'm talking about the beyond it. Yeah, no. Singleton and Allen we know what they have. You have there. You've got like I said, in the top 5 in the conversation for running back duos. I think in the Big Ten you probably have 3 of the top 5 with running back duos, and they're in the conversation. That's proven there. My concern if they go down. What do you have behind them? You have depth, yes, but not really proven depth. Yeah, that's the unproven part I'm looking at. Now, Singleton and Allen are phenomenal, and they're amongst the best running backs in college football, especially when you pair them together. I'm not concerned there. My concern would be if heaven forbid, the 2 of them go down, then what?
Yeah, and I think that's where I hope that Trey Potts is able to
Yeah,
help. And I think
Potts, Tank
Tank
brings
Smith
that
is
change of pace
capable.
too. Yeah, absolutely.
So it is Locked On Nittany Lions. Jason Lord joining me on the show. I'm Zach Seyko, your host. Before we move forward with talking about now, with the good comes not necessarily the bad, but what position groups does Penn State still need to work on? Defensive tackle, wide receiver. Maybe there's another spot
Yeah.
that the Nittany Lions need some help.
Well,
Before we get to that, let's hear from our sponsor of today's episode, and that is FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Now head on over to FanDuel because you got to make a fast break during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers can get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is right, $1,000 in bonus bets back when your first bet does not win. Great promotions every day. It's safe and secure, super easy to use. And the best part, you get paid instantly. Paid instantly for your winnings. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sports book, and that is FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. And once again, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. Jason Lord joining me on the show. I'm Zach Seyko. Penn State rivals, making Locked On Nittany Lions your go-to podcast for Penn State rivals. Visit happyvalleyinsider.com for everything Penn State athletics, all the latest in the transfer portal, recruiting, football, men's basketball, all 31 varsity sports in Happy Valley. You name it, that is Penn State rivals. Visit happyvalleyinsider.com. Jason, we've talked, there's a lot of position groups that Penn State should take a lot of pride in here.
Yeah.
And I know we didn't mention quarterback, but we're talking best of the best. If you look at the QB depth chart,
that's the concern too. Yeah, absolutely.
You have a lot of inexperience. You have a lot of concern. Is Drew Aller, his first biggest test is not West Virginia. I think it's going on the road to Illinois. But
yeah,
besides that point, real quick, out of all the position groups on this Penn State team, Jason, who do you? There's a best group which we've identified. There's a weakest link. Who's your weakest link?
Well, I'm going to give you two. I'm going to give you the one of them that you already touched on, wide receiver. I think is a concern for me. You know what you have in Trey Wallace. You know what you have in Keandre Lambert-Smith. Those are your two really proven commodities that are going to be fine. The portal is going to help wide receivers. I think you're going to have Mega obviously is going to be a guy that's going to play. Cephas when he gets here, I think he'll be a guy that's going to play. But, you're going to have – is Clifford going to be maybe a dark horse? Is Amari Evans going to be a guy that steps up? Saunders going to be a guy that steps up? All of these are questions that really haven't been answered yet. I think you have two receivers. You have a good – assuming the tight ends can stay healthy. And, look, we don't know Theo Johnson's, in terms, obviously, the legal troubles in the offseason. But
right.
Other than that, I think the wide receivers, I don't know if you have enough proven depth just yet. I think that was a concern going into spring. I think that's still a concern right now. The portal's going to help it, though. I think you're going to have guys that are going to step in and play well.
Yeah, I hope wide receiver does get a little better, but it is telling, and I've said this quite a bit, that Penn State is still targeting guys in the portal that Malik McClain and Dante Cephas were not enough. Even the idea, because Dante Cephas hasn't been on campus. He's now here. He's in Happy Valley at this point in time. But Dante Cephas and Malik McClain, I said, you know what? Those are two home run gets, at least in the transfer portal. Then Dante Cephas isn't on campus. Malik McClain seems to be running with the second string. Those three starters that we saw, the starters at the blue and white game, Keandre Lambert-Smith, Amari Evans, who had a massive game for them on the team, and then Trey Wallace, as you mentioned. But you also talked to James Franklin in post-practice, and anytime he's done a press conference, it's always been Lambert-Smith and it's always been Trey Wallace. It's never been anybody else, which is really not even Amari Evans. He's, when they say who's really stood out wide receiver, Keandre Lambert-Smith, Trey Wallace. Anybody else, coach? It is everybody else. That's the problem. Nobody else has stood out.
Yeah, that is the problem. I think very clear as day for me is nobody else has stood out. That's exactly why, for me, as I'm looking at it, I don't know if you can call them a strength. The tight ends, again, are going to help, I think, very clearly. You're going to have guys that have played the position there. You have guys coming in that got a little activity in the spring game that I think are going to step up and play better too. But yeah, wide receiver is still a concern for me. I'll give you another one is what's the status in terms of a kicker? What are you going to do there? That's going to be the one that I think is a weakness right now. It might be a strength come September 2nd when, Penn State goes 5 for 5 on field goals. You hope not. You hope they score in the red zone. But if 5 for 5 and they score touchdowns in the red zone, but they go 5 for 5 in field goals and they're all over 50 yards, then gets shut out. But right now it's a weakness for me. Who's going to replace Vinegar?
It's thank goodness for at least let's just on paper, right? Let's not assume injuries. Let's not assume anything else. But the offensive line and the ground game are going to do a lot of things here. One, they're going to bail Drew Aller out and allow him to grow up and gain that experience and not have as much pressure. He's going to be able to sit back in the pocket. He's going to be able to lean on Singleton and Allen and just the ground game in a variety of ways, and having Mike Yurcich's consistency in offensive game planning. But that does one of two things. So it makes Drew Aller more comfortable. It also helps him in the red zone. How do teams score in short distances? They pound the rock. They run the football. So Penn State isn't going to have to rely on a kicking game that is 50-50 at best, Jason, because
right now it is. Yeah, I think right now it is.
I'm not a fan of the kicking game. I'll go even a step further. Just the whole special teams unit. That is my pick.
Yeah, I think and you got to win 3 phases of the game. It's what James Franklin preaches.
It's
absolutely
the whole special teams unit. So you mentioned kicker. I don't feel confident in a Sanders Sahadak or whoever else they're going. That includes place kicker. That includes, and I know that Alex Falcons, Riley Thompson come in. Alex Falcons to kick and Riley Thompson to punt, but. And it seems like Falcons is going to be the starting place kicker. But at punter, Alex Bichetta was supposed to be this world-class guy. He was training with Blake Gillikin. He was supposed to be the next really good punter after Barney and Moore, of course, Jordan Stout and Gillikin himself. But then you watch the blue and white game, and he did not impress me. He actually made me a little more concerned than I was. You have Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen as your kick returners. That's fine. That's not my preference. I would like somebody else back there, but if that's your best guy, you put him back there. Totally get it.
Yeah, I think sometimes you put your best guy back there. I think they did it with Saquon Barkley and it worked. So I think sometimes you do put your best guy back there. Just quickly touching on your first point. Yeah. And the other part with the punts in the blue white game, there's nobody rushing those punts.
Yeah.
That's the other part of it. Yeah. So that's the other part of it. So yeah, it's a concern for me.
And then punt returner, right? A kick returner has some it's solidified, but for punt returner, is it going to be Caden Saunders? Is it going to be Keandre Lambert-Smith? That is a wide open competition from what I've heard, but that still doesn't make me like the entire special teams unit. You go from Jahan Dotson and Jordan Stout, and Jordan Stout did everything, right? Place kicking, punting, kickoff. So that one person handles all these facets of what we're talking about. And then everyone was afraid to punt to Jahan Dotson. Everybody was afraid to punt to Parker Washington. But now, especially that punting part of it, if Riley Thompson doesn't boost that group, Penn State, even though the defense is really good, part of the reason the defense was as good under Brent Pry and Manny Diaz these past few seasons is because Jordan Stout and Barney Moore allowed the defense to have some extra cushion and forced opponents' offenses to drive 90-plus yards in certain cases. Penn State's defense, just by the nature of the game of football, is not going to be as good when they're covering a shorter field. It's just a fact of the matter. That's anybody's defense.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, no doubt about it. 100% agree.
So special teams is just, I think defensive tackle is an obvious, right? They're still looking for players.
I think you get help in the portal, which helped a lot. But yeah, defensive tackle still concern. But yeah, you get help in the portal though with Ford.
So I'm not worried about the secondary. I'm not worried about the linebackers. I'm not worried about the defensive ends. I'm not worried about the O-line, the running backs, the quarterbacks. I would still like them to get a veteran. Why can Ohio State and Michigan do it? Go to get a guy that's been Ohio State's case, right? They got a 7th-year player in Jebbia out of Oregon State, a 7th-year quarterback to come in and just be strictly a backup, a clipboard holder. Why can't Penn State do that?
They could. Yeah, they could. The depth is a concern at quarterback. Yes. The other worry, look, no matter who you are, when you're making your first or second start, there's going to be worry. There's always the great unknown, even though the hype is there. We've seen a little bit of what Aller could do we've not seen him on the biggest stage just yet. That I think is one of the big parts of it. He came in the Purdue game in moments and looked real good, I thought, last year, first game. So that was a tough environment. So he's got the experience playing on the road a little bit, but as a starter, what can he do with this team full season? That I think is going to be the question mark. And not having the experience behind him, could it play a role? Yeah, it maybe. But the other thing for me is as hyped as this team is, you're going to live and die by the quarterback. But you touched on it. Got a great running game. It's got a great offensive line. Those are two of the quarterback's best friends. Receivers, we'll see. But you have a great running game. You have a great offensive line. That's a huge start with an inexperienced quarterback.
And consistency and play calling.
Right. Absolutely.
No change in offensive coordinator style. Like they have the system, they have the fit. It's all ready to go. Locked On Nittany Lions is your go-to podcast for Penn State rivals. Visit happyvalleyinsider.com for everything Penn State athletics, football, men's basketball, and it'll all be right here too on Locked On Nittany Lions. We're going to continue to have conversations around the transfer portal, what Mike Rhodes is getting, and of course, if James Franklin does make any additions through the portal to boost some of the groups that we talked about, wide receiver, defensive tackle in particular. In this final segment, Jason, let's just because I want your opinion, because the comment section opened up on one recent episode, which I encourage people to go check out, because I laid out the reasons why Penn State makes its decision about the whiteout game in terms of time and network, in terms of weather, and then quality of opponents. So based on those criteria, Jason, we talked before we went live here, right?
Yeah.
You don't like my pick about Iowa.
It's not that I don't like the pick. I don't think it's going to be a night game. I could be wrong. Look, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be a night game because, well, it's not going to be, in my opinion, it's not going to be a night game on NBC. Ohio State and Notre Dame play that day. Yeah. Notre Dame doesn't like to be overshadowed. You know that. So I don't think, they don't like their ego getting bruised. That's why they don't play in a conference. But, and they don't share the money either, that part too. But I think there's a chance Iowa will be, because I think there's a very good chance Michigan will not be, for a number of reasons.
Strictly just because they're late in the season.
They're late in the season. It's November. Fox likes the big games. Yeah, so we'll see.
Yeah, Fox gets that game. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a very good chance Fox gets that game. Who knows? But I think there's a very good chance Fox probably gets that game. So do you want a noon whiteout? You had it before against Michigan. I don't think the juice is there for a noon whiteout. So does that leave West Virginia? Do you maybe do it week one? Man. I don't think so.
I hope not.
I think West Virginia. Look, the fans are going to be up for that game. That's going to be a big game for that reason.
They'll travel.
First game of the year. Yeah, but I think Penn State's going to. I think that it might be a slow start, but I think they beat them by 4 touchdowns. So I don't know if that's a game that you're going to have. So it leaves Iowa and Indiana probably.
Yeah,
because you're not going to do Delaware. UMass is obviously not. I think UMass will be homecoming probably.
Yeah.
So that leaves it leaves maybe Indiana, and I don't think you're going to do Rutgers, right?
No,
that game's late in November anyway.
Season, yeah.
So I think that leaves Iowa and Indiana as your probable picks. The only reason I frown about Iowa, how dark's it going to get in September at 3:30? I hope a little bit, but if you can maybe have CBS pick that game up, 3:30 game, then you have a 3:30 whiteout, maybe. Could you get a night game out of Iowa on another network? Maybe. I just don't. I think if Penn State's going to have the whiteout, and look, I don't have inside information. I have no idea. But I think to me, if they're going to have the whiteout, it's going to be on one of the 3 bigger networks. It's not going to be on BTN or anything.
No.
So, and Iowa will be on a network. No, don't get me wrong. Iowa will be one of the big 3. But I just it's going to be hard to say that would be a 7:30 kick unless, a lot of wrinkles are pulled somehow. Because I just think Ohio State and Notre Dame is going to be the big game on NBC that day. And I don't think NBC is going to pick that game up for that reason. Can you do a 3:30 whiteout? Sure you can. I think it'll get dark. But
it's been done.
Yeah, it's been done. So I think Iowa is... Right now, as I look at it, the probable choice, if I'm guessing, but maybe Indiana, maybe you do Michigan. But then again, the only other option is you do it right away against West Virginia. I kind of feel like when NBC announced that on Saturday, they would have announced it as the whiteout too.
Yeah.
If it was going to be the whiteout. But again, who knows? Maybe Penn State doesn't even know what the whiteout's going to be yet. So you never know. I think they probably have a good idea. But who knows? I think, Iowa is probably going to be the one I would pick would be because everybody knows the animosity now because of, the game, a couple of years back with the ridiculous. Yeah, because Iowa's pace runs so fast offensively, you had to fake injuries. Absolutely. They just run a real high tempo offense. That was the most ridiculous thing I ever saw. But I think that to me would probably you have a story there. You have a potential 3:30 or later start. So that if I'm guessing, I think Iowa's a good chance, very good chance. I would put that in a high percentage. Michigan, I'd put in an okay percentage. I just think the time of the year. And look, you could have night games in November. Let's make that clear.
Yeah, now you can do that.
Picking that up, you can now do that. But I don't know. I still think Fox is probably going to swoop in and take that game, if I'm guessing. So I think Iowa probably, and maybe Indiana, if you can get one of the three big networks to pick Indiana up. One of those two maybe, and if it's not West Virginia. So long answer to a short question, but I think you're probably right. I think Iowa would be the leader in the clubhouse right now.
Yeah.
But it's hard to tell with the game times. It's hard to tell, how many primetime games Penn State's going to get and when they're going to be and who they're going to be against. So we know West Virginia. Could that be the whiteout? Maybe. But I think, if I'm guessing, you're to say pick one game, I would say probably Iowa. Iowa's be the leader right now, even though NBC's probably not going to take that game.
Yeah, and it's not about who I want. I'm trying to tell the fans that this is the game that Penn State's going to pick because everyone's obvious choice is Michigan, right?
Michigan,
you need the whiteout environment for that Michigan game because
there's no juice in a noon whiteout if Fox would happen to take that game. I can tell you that. But was there in 2015 when they played Michigan. There's just the juice and you don't necessarily even need I don't care what time of game Penn State plays Ohio State or Michigan. You're going to be up for that game. I would hope.
Yeah.
In terms of the crowd and fans.
Yeah. So we'll see. Depends on network. It depends on time.
Yeah,
and that literally means kickoff.
Especially with the third network coming in now. You just don't know.
Yeah. So Fox, CBS, NBC, we'll see. We just know that West Virginia, Penn State is a night game on NBC. That's part of it here. But given the revelation of Ohio State and Notre Dame and that NBC still has the rights to those Notre Dame home games, that complicates that game.
Yeah.
So,
that's your game of the day. And Notre Dame, Ohio State's going to be a massive game that day. And NBC has it with it being Notre Dame home game. So, I wouldn't see NBC taking the Iowa game. I really wouldn't. So that would hurt. It hurt its chances being a night game. But I still think there's a chance that is probably that could be the whiteout.
Jason, I appreciate the time as always, the insight,
Thanks
trying to answer the puzzle of the whiteout game. Thanks again, and I can't wait to talk to you again in the not too distant future.
Looking forward to it. Absolutely, anytime.